20-minute talk, which I'm going to present in approximately 20 minutes. It is not a 3-day workshop or a 1-day workshop for which I have 45 minutes. So, if you were expecting that, you're in the wrong talk. So this is a talk I originally wrote for the first security track at Apricot last year. It's about improving the FreeBSD security advisory process, which historically has not been known for its greatness. Since I usually present this at conferences where we don't have many people know about FreeBSD, and because this is being recorded for the internet, hello internet, I should just get the usual terminology out of the way. There are 3 things that are called FreeBSD. The first thing is FreeBSD, the operating system. FreeBSD is a Unix-like open source operating system which is descended from patches that floated around the University of Berkeley way back in the 70s, and it's been maintained by a community of open source developers since the 1990s. So we call that the FreeBSD Project. The FreeBSD Project is the loose association of hackers from all around the internet who maintain the FreeBSD operating system. Finally, the FreeBSD Foundation is a non-profit organization registered in the US, which is mostly just taking money from people and giving it to the FreeBSD developers, funding developments, funding their travels, and that sort of thing. Who uses FreeBSD? Well, lots of people, probably you. This is a bunch of logos I found on the FreeBSD Foundation website once upon a time, who admits to using FreeBSD. So Apple uses FreeBSD as the base of their Darwin macOS operating system-ish. It's been mangled to within an inch of its life. NetApp, again, mangled to within an inch of its life. People who use FreeBSD more in the way God intended are people like Netflix and WhatsApp, who actually run FreeBSD, the operating system, rather than FreeBSD, the sum of its parts. Sony has, also is on the side of the Apples and the NetApps. They have mangled FreeBSD to within an inch of its life, and it runs on various bits of entertainment hardware, let's call it. And all these other companies just run FreeBSD in some way or form, or used to. So the point I'm trying to make with this slide is that everyone uses FreeBSD. You might just not know about it. Why do these people use FreeBSD? Well, there's a couple of things where FreeBSD excels. One of the things is our community. We are friendly and professional. Hello. I'm the friendly side. I don't know about the professionals. We have many active contributors and committers. For many of those people have been working on FreeBSD for 10 years, 20 years, and even longer. And our community is very welcoming to new people, and we're always very happy to help anyone who uses FreeBSD. You turn up on our mailing list, so we are happy to help you with whatever adventures you are running FreeBSD on. People like FreeBSD's mentoring processes. When someone comes with a question about FreeBSD, we manage to rope them into the project by mentoring them, and then suddenly they start submitting patches, and they become committers themselves. FreeBSD has fantastic documentation. We are widely known for documenting everything we produce in very detailed ways. We have a handbook, we have a developer's handbook, porter's handbook, and every one of the FreeBSD tools has a man page somewhere. Finally, we have a very friendly 2-clause BSD license, which allows you to take FreeBSD and use it for anything you want, and you don't even have to tell us about it. This is what makes us attractive to some of the larger companies on the previous slides. Unfortunately, where we historically don't really excel is our security track records. We're not very good at handling security vulnerabilities in a timely manner. Sometimes, someone submits a bug report and it appears to languish pretty much indefinitely in the bug tracker. And when this is a security issue, this is not great. Now, there's a couple of things I should mention. FreeBSD has a very large and diverse code base. We've got 4 rough categories. We've got a kernel, but the kernel is not just one piece of software. The kernel has networking in it, has storage in it, device drivers in it, virtual memory in it, and a whole bunch of other things in it. And someone who likes working on the network stack is not necessarily going to be interested in storage or know anything about storage for that matter. Likewise, people who crank out device drivers have no idea how networks work. Once the packet's out of the ring buffer, it is no longer my problem. So there's problems with manpower. People who work on one aspect of the kernel are not necessarily familiar with other aspects of the kernel. Likewise, userland, kernel developers might not know much about userland or might not be very interested in it. And even within userland, there's different bits and pieces and moving parts of FreeBSD, and different people work on them. And then we've got third-party components which we have inside FreeBSD. So we ship OpenSSL, we ship OpenSSH, sendmail, unbound, NTPD. All of these things, that's just a subset of what we ship with FreeBSD, but all of these things have a more or less dubious security track records. And when they break in FreeBSD, it's the FreeBSD security team's problem to make sure that they get patched in a timely manner. And last but not least, there's the ports collection or the packages collection, which is, I think it's more than 38,000 third-party applications now. Any of those things might have security problems in them. And if you're a ports developer, or a maintainer of one specific port, you might not know about any other thing. So we have 400 or so FreeBSD committers, I think at last count, but they all work on different things, and our code base is large and diverse. So even if one developer has time on his hands to keep an eye on security issues, they might not actually be familiar with the issue that is currently a problem. So how does a vulnerability response work? Well, if it's a FreeBSD only problem, so hello, I have found a buffer overflow in part of FreeBSD, and only FreeBSD is affected, then there's no NDA, there's no explicit embargo. It only applies to FreeBSD. It might also apply to NetBSD and OpenBSD. And there's no major risk of exposure. So that's one category of problems we have. And this one is comparatively trivial, right? If it's just a FreeBSD problem, we just patch it, we send a security advisory, and we're done. The only problem is that someone needs to have time to work on this. A more complicated category of problems is the multi-vendor coordinated response. This is, recently has been a very popular category of bugs with speculative execution problems. When they tell us about it. When? If they tell us about it. And who are these us you talk about? FreeBSD is an open source community. There is no us, so we'll come to that. This is much more complicated. So there tend to be non-disclosure agreements or explicit embargo deadlines, and you can't just share this information with everyone. The response needs to be coordinated via either a private party, usually whoever discovered the bug, which sometimes they're individuals, more usually they work for vulnerability research firms, or they're coordinated by some certs or CC organization. It requires limited disclosure to contain risk of exposure, so it would be deeply embarrassing if some FreeBSD individual knew about a very impactful bug and shared it with the rest of the internet on Twitter weeks before every other operating system known to man has been patched. So we have to be a bit careful about that. So examples of that are all the speculative execution bugs. This is a slide deck from 2018. 2019 was also rife with that sort of bugs. So, two classes of vulnerability response. The FreeBSD only response, comparatively trivial. Someone sends us a message to the security officer list, which is a small group of people, and we fix it, we send a security advisory, done. Multi-vendor coordinated response, much more complicated. We get an email from either the researcher who's discovered the bug or from a cert CC, and then the whole dance starts with non-disclosure agreements or explicit embargoes, and it takes a lot longer, and you can't just go quiet halfway through. So who deals with this on FreeBSD? Well, we have a security officer, and the security officer has a very broad charter and needs to do a lot of things. This is a lot of words on this slide, but we need to resolve disputes involving security. So, if something breaks if someone introduces a security bug that unfortunately leads to some disputes from time to time, and the security officer tends to get wrapped up in that, and you end up with long email discussions which are no fun for anyone. We also have to resolve software bugs that affect the security in FreeBSD in a timely fashion. So all security bugs are the security officer's responsibility. Great. Then you have the bureaucracy part. We need to issue security advisories for FreeBSD. This is a fairly involved process. We have to create the patch, make sure the patch works on all supported branches, commit the patch, get the commit numbers, and then write the advisory and send the advisory out to the announced mailing list. So there's a couple of steps involved. Many of them have been automated by shell scripts, but there's still quite a few of them that require actual manual work by a sentient, thinking, awake human being. We have to reply to vendor inquiries regarding security issues. So we have a bunch of people, well, a large bunch of people who incorporate either FreeBSD as a whole or the sum of its parts, or more or fewer of the parts of FreeBSD. They will have questions about a security issue, and we need to reply to them, preferably in a timely manner, or they will think that FreeBSD is dead or FreeBSD is dying, and they'll switch to Linux, which, that's not great for them. It's not great for us either. The FreeBSD security officer is also expected to audit as much code as possible. This is a lot of work. And we need to monitor the appropriate channels for bugs. So we need to keep our eyes open on Twitter, which is increasingly where bugs are reported. I'm not sure how that works. And we need to participate in architecture discussions. So if new bits come into FreeBSD, then we should make sure that they don't deteriorate the security of the operating system as a whole. And finally, we need to maintain the security officer PGP key. This is the easiest part of the job. Just don't leak the PGP key. So what are the challenges of this? Well, it's an extremely broad mandate. That was a lot of words on a slide, and it's a lot of hurry up and wait. This is the problem with security bugs. It's very quiet for a couple of months at a time, and then suddenly everything catches fire. Nothing is happening. We're just working, and we have all these other background tasks, right? So it's not as if we're bored. So nothing is on fire. We can be auditing code. We can be keeping an eye on the bug tracker, and security work does happen. But then suddenly everything catches fire. People have other things going on. People have day jobs, families, lives, I understand. And some of these bugs require a very high level of technical knowledge, very specific to something that breaks. The speculative execution bugs are a good example of this. The number of people who are familiar with the deep innards of the Intel architecture, which broke, are few and far between, and they need to have time. And this leads to, inevitable, it leads to burnout. So we've gone through a number of security officers in a short period of time, and the hurry up and wait bits is just not conducive to a friendly working environment. And there's very few people who have the level of knowledge required to do the job. So for one thing, you need to be familiar with the security process. What sort of response is expected from a security team? How do NDAs work? How do embargoes work? And then you need to also know the moving parts of this FreeBSD security process. But then if you want to actually fix the bugs, you also need to have domain-specific knowledge. And this is very difficult to find qualified candidates. So the FreeBSD project is fixing this a little bit. This is an ongoing process, but we've put some new, fresh blood in the security team. We have a new security officer, Gordon, who is not burned out yet. Hang in there, Gordon. Hang in there, Gordon. We've split up the technical resource requirement from the vulnerability response requirement. So historically, the FreeBSD security team was a mailing list with a sympathy of 1,000. It wasn't ever 1,000 people, but there were 20 people on a mailing list, more or less active, with lots of domain-specific knowledge and some bureaucratic knowledge. And vulnerabilities were just handled, or vulnerability reports rather, were just handled on an as-needed basis. And inevitably, quite a few of them just slipped through the cracks. And that wasn't sustainable. So we've changed our way of working so that we have a smaller number of people on the security officer alias who are mostly delegating the work to other people. This allows us to use our non-technical resources for vulnerability response. So I've put on the secretary hat for my sins, and all I do is I reply to people and I make sure that bugs are tracked. We have a bug tracker. We make sure that people who report bugs are actually kept in the loop, and we delegate the actual research and fixing of the vulnerability to people with domain-specific knowledge. So we just assign the bug to them, or we rope them in other ways. And that's been working really well now. The FreeBSD Foundation, remember my 3 FreeBSD things, are also helping improve the FreeBSD security track record or security vulnerability handling. The FreeBSD Foundation can sign NDAs, which is really helpful. So, large vendors of CPUs, which seem to break with alarming regularity, find it a lot easier to share exactly how broken they are with an organization with which they've got an NDA, rather than, a loose band of individuals who might go off on Twitter and, share the dirty laundry. The FreeBSD Foundation also has money. I'm not allowed to say that, but I'm saying it anyway. The FreeBSD Foundation has some amount of money and can pay for some things. So the FreeBSD Foundation pays for the deputy security officer's time. Ed Masters, I think, full-time employee of the FreeBSD Foundation. He's being paid as part of his duties to work on security. Great. The FreeBSD Foundation also pays for the security officer's travel to certain conferences where other security people meet. And the FreeBSD Foundation can pay for development resources to enable response. So we've got one full-time employee, Kostik, who is just cranking out fixes to all sorts of bugs all the time. And this is immensely helpful to keep FreeBSD secure. And as a case study, this is a slightly stale one. It's the slide deck is from 2018. The debug register vulnerability in the Intel CPU, where debug registers were, not behaving quite the way we thought anyone thought they were specified. It was a multi-vendor response, and FreeBSD was pulled in early because we could. The right people at Microsoft knew who to talk to at FreeBSD. We had representations from all BSDs, Microsoft, Apple, Citrix, VMware, a whole bunch of Linux distributions, Google and Intel. There was lots of collaborations on proofs of concepts with other variants of BSD. It turns out that the fix was similar to all of the BSD variants. And once the cert was involved, we could also give patches to pfSense, which is a FreeBSD distribution which runs on firewalls. We managed to publish the security advisory within an hour of the embargo being dropped, and we managed to be there before Red Hat, which makes us very happy. So, historically, FreeBSD has not been particularly good about being on top of security, but we're improving, gradually. I like to improve faster, but things are actually moving in the FreeBSD community. And that is the end of this talk. Any questions? Hello. There is a microphone for the benefit of the internet. It might even work. That's hot.
Sorry if I missed the first part due to a phone call, but does FreeBSD have a formal process for notifying of vulnerabilities and collaboration?
Yes, we have the security officer address is the formal process, and we publish a PGP key. So the formal process is you send a message, you send an email, you are a security researcher, or you are a representative of a large tip company, or you are an individual who has found a bug, you are any of these things. You send an email to the FreeBSD security officer alias. You can send that encrypted with PGP if you like, and you will very quickly receive an email from me whenever I wake up and see that email. I manage to respond to security officer mail within about 20 hours usually. And then I copy-paste the email into the security officer bug tracker, and it gets followed up. The FreeBSD security team now has fortnightly calls where we follow up whatever's in the bug reporter. Anything that's critical will probably be dealt with earlier. If it's lower priority or less important, it might take a fortnight or so before anyone actively looks at it. But if it's something like everything is on fire, it'll usually get someone's attention within a day or two. Well, within a day, ideally, probably within a day or two, anywhere on Earth. But yes, mail to FreeBSD security officer does not go into the voids. It never actually did go into the voids, but it could appear that it was not being looked at because there was no one responding. So it happened in the past that someone reports a security bug, it gets fixed, and eventually a security advisory goes out, but at no point did anyone think of replying to the submitter. This is no longer the case. Any other questions? Yes, the microphone is somewhere in the back for the benefit of the internet.
Out of all the reports you get, what's the signal to noise ratio? So maybe a number in how many?
I don't have exact numbers, but not great. So we get a lot of, and well, I don't think there's any security people from other operating systems around, but I've given this talk at security conferences before, and it's about average for the industry. So we get a lot of email from what I would call vulnerability trolls, who just go and fuzz parts of the operating system, and then if you are root and you load your gun this way, point it at your foot, and pull the trigger, your foot falls off. If you are root, if you already need privilege in order to exploit this bug, it is not a security vulnerability. It's a bug, it needs to be fixed, but the security officer list is not the way to go through this. So we get a lot of bugs that smell like security bugs, but are not actually security bugs. I don't have exact numbers, but a large percentage of the email we get to security officer is of that variety. I have been playing with the system, and I'm running as root, and I'm doing something the system does not expect, and this is a security vulnerability because my kernel panics. No, it isn't, because you are running as root. So we get lots of that. So the signal to noise ratio is not great. We also get a lot of spam, but yes, I'm also postmaster for my other sins. So yes, the security officer alias is also spam filtered, but there's a non-spam filtered version of the security officer address, which changes every now and again and is published on the web page. So if you suspect that you have sent a message and it was caught by the spam filter, or the spam filter has told you that this message was not delivered, then there is another address which rotates every now and again, which has no spam filtering and gets a lot of spam. So yes, the signal to noise ratio, not great, but not actually terrible either. Any other questions? No. Oh, more. Hooray.
You mentioned that you follow Twitter looking for...
I don't. I don't. We are expected to, I think is the wording I used. Monitoring the appropriate channels, yes, that's what we are expected to do. Some people do, actually. It is really good at following Twitter, and if something comes up, and we do have every now and again someone else who monitors. The nice thing about social media is other people follow it for you. And every now and again we get 3 or 4 emails from someone who saw some Twittergram with everything is terrible, and happily in the majority of those cases it's of the variety, I'm running as root and I have shot myself in the foot and I think this is a security problem, but every now and again it isn't. Yes. Oh, Andy again. Hello.
How well do you collaborate with the other BSDs? So Net, Open.
We have a good working relationship with them. So if there's a bug that affects the other BSDs, we know the right people to talk to, and we can collaborate closely. So I don't have an example at the top of my head, but bugs that affect only the BSDs are actually a lot easier to deal with than bugs that also affect other operating systems, because we share conferences, we have faces to map to names, we know when people are awake, and we know also roughly who is working on which part of the other BSD's kernels, so we can immediately talk to the right technical resources in addition to their security people. So,
when you're working on a bug fix, say on FreeBSD, do you reach out to, say, OpenBSD and say, hey, have you...
If it affects them, then we would reach out to them, yes. I don't have an example at the top of my head where we had to talk to OpenBSD because our kernels diverge, or our operating systems diverge quite a bit. And actually, when it comes to OpenBSD, it's probably more likely that the collaboration would be in the other direction, because we are a consumer of things like OpenSSH, which, OpenSSH has a very good security track record. But if something like OpenSSH were to spring a leak, we would expect the OpenBSD folks to get in touch with us. But when it comes to the speculative execution bugs, we know the right people to talk to. Unfortunately, the big ones are not under our control, because we are, there's the multi-vendor thing. We might have an NDA with, say, Intel when Intel breaks, but we cannot share it with OpenBSD because they are not us. So when we can share with the other BSDs, obviously we can. So that's the left side. The FreeBSD only response is actually, there's two classes of that. If it's only FreeBSD and maybe NetBSD and OpenBSD, then we can quietly sort it out among the BSDs. But when it's multi-vendor coordinated response, then we need to stick to the terms of the embargo. We need to stick to the terms of the NDA. We can't just, we will consider NetBSD as part of FreeBSD, or we'll consider OpenBSD as part of FreeBSD for the purpose of this vulnerability. It doesn't work that way.
The other fun part is that while the BSDs have a common ancestry, that ancestry was a long time ago.
Yes.
And so NetBSD and OpenBSD internally in the kernel are quite different to FreeBSD. And OpenBSD has even drifted away from NetBSD somewhat, but less so.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to things like speculative execution, that involves a whole lot of work inside the virtual memory subsystem, and that is hilariously different between FreeBSD and the other two. And so while it would be nice if that was easier to deal with, it's not.
But there are other things where we share codes. So
OpenSSH is a perfectly good example.
And any codes that existed before the NetBSD FreeBSD split is very easy to deal with. But very little of that code is still, quite a bit of that code is still relevant, but not very much of that code is still security sensitive. So if someone breaks telnet-D, actually, about a year or so ago, someone found a bug in a telnet client. So if you talk to a rogue telnet server, one of the telnet control signals could make your telnet client be upset. And if you run telnet as root, obviously, bad things can happen. And we happened to share that code with the other BSDs, and we had a nice discussion about it. And I think we all released patches around the same time. And any code that's from later than the mid-90s is going to start diverging, and any code from the mid-2000s onwards is diverged wildly. So as far as the kernel is concerned, there's not much overlap anymore. It's user space, of course, is a different kettle of fish. And unfortunately, the multi-vendor, we would like to be closer friends with the other BSDs. We happen to like them. But when it comes to multi-vendor coordinated response, it's not us coordinating. It's whatever cert is coordinating it that gets to call the shots. And that does unfortunately lead to some, let's say, interesting presentations at other conferences where, yes.
Mention the war.
Don't mention the war. It was a long time ago. Under pressure.
You may have answered this, but I missed it if you did. How many people in the security team for FreeBSD at the moment?
Baker's dozen, a handful, one of those numbers.
And is there more than one security officer, or is there a single person?
There's one security officer. Gordon's the security officer. Ed is the deputy security officer. There's at least 3 people with the PGP key. And 2 of those are known to be able to use the PGP key. I think, yes. There's something about a passphrase that comes up every now and again. But
so then the other 9 or so people, whatever
yes,
it is,
yes.
are just sort of supporting.
Yes, a small, yes, exactly. And we have fortnightly calls, and it's usually about 6 of us, 5 or 6 of us on the call. And it is extremely difficult to organize conference calls on more than 3 continents at a time. But and I always draw the short straw. It's always crazy o'clock in the morning or crazy o'clock at night for me. I don't sleep. Sleep happens to other people. Yes.
Some of the very big and very profitable logos at the start of the presentation are presumably quite reliant on FreeBSD to be secure and trustworthy.
Yes.
Are they terribly good at financing these sort of paid security positions? Or follow-up question, should they be?
Many of the big logos on that slide give money to the FreeBSD Foundation. And the point of the FreeBSD Foundation is to fund FreeBSD, well, one of the points of the FreeBSD Foundation is to fund FreeBSD development. So indirectly, yes, many of the logos on that slide do contribute to the FreeBSD security process. Additionally, we also have a reasonably good working relationship with many of the logos on that page, where if they find a vulnerability in their derivative of FreeBSD or in their use of FreeBSD, as the case may be, they do send email to us and let us know, so that we can share a CV or that we can at least coordinate response. That's not to say that there's no room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. And with some of the bigger names, that does require bureaucracy, and the FreeBSD Foundation is a useful vehicle for that. I don't know how many of those large logos, Deb, do you know how many of those large logos we have NDAs with? At least one of them. Yeah. So, yes. So we do have reasonable coverage there. So if... And those tend to be the ones that require the multi-vendor responses, which are really time-consuming and sometimes frustrating. But I think security is frustrating. All right, I think I have consumed more time with this talk than I was allotted. Ooh, is that allowed? All right, I think we call that the end. Thank you very much.